Hey guys, thanks for watching and welcome to the video. In this video, we'll be talking about the KZ ZVX IEM and comparing it to the 7Hz Zero, which I think is the most realistic competitor for it, as well as my recently reviewed CCA CRA with the new tuning. We'll do measurements of each and talk about the differences between them. These are all budget options at around $20, and we'll talk about my initial impressions of the unit using music, then look at frequency response graphs and listen to some music samples. I'll do the test using CP100 plus tips, which are my favorite ear tips, but I'll use foam tips for frequency response graphs to keep things consistent with what I've done in the past. If you are new to the channel, my name is Jeremy, and I created this channel to look at the value end of the audio spectrum and compare what you get to the more expensive IEMs out there, or other audio equipment out there, but in this case, IEMs. I'm always looking for the best price to performance ratio and really enjoy finding items that outperform their price point. I appreciate you watching and thanks for stopping by. If there is anything at all I can do to help you on your audio journey, feel free to drop me a note below. All right, let's get started. Feel free to jump around using the chapter markers below. There is going to be a pretty extensive audio component to this that you can listen to. And if you don't want to, just skip over to the next part of the video. We're going to break this up into sections. Initial impressions first, then the frequency response graphs that I will show you and give you my impression of them. Whether you think I know what I'm talking about or not is definitely up for debate, and feel free to leave a comment below if you disagree with what I took out of it. And then we will get into audio samples, and then we will also get into my impressions of the gaming performance of each. And just so you know, if you're curious about that right off the bat, they're all tuned to be very good gaming options. I don't know that, I mean, they're not perfect. There's items that are a lot more expensive that do a better job, but these do a very good job in terms of their price point. Any of them would do good if you're just looking for something that does a good job during gaming. So again, feel free to skip around using the chapters. I will leave them down in the description. All testing will be done on an iPhone 14 Pro Max using an American 1-volt version of the Apple dongle. I listened to these IEMs without looking at any frequency response graphs first or reading any reviews of the new unit. So these are my clear impressions without being I didn't see what anybody else thought about them, and I hope they're as uncolored as possible. I also did not look at the frequency response graphs until after I'd actually listened to the units. So I hope that helps. These are just my impressions, and then we will get into the graphs in a minute. Anyway, so my impressions could be completely wrong. Later in the video, we'll look at frequency response graphs, then do some audio samples. My initial impression of the the ZVX was that it had an anemic bass response that gave a pretty bloated and basic sound. Basically on hip-hop focused tracks, there's some IEMs that even if they have a lot of bass, the muddiness of it leads to an almost feeling of like a splat. It's just like bleh, bleh, bleh. And that's what I got with these when I was listening to them. They did not leave me with a feeling of like power and the like on some songs they would sound very good bass wise if the bass was tuned just right, but especially like a good test of this is like old like 90s hip hop where a lot of the bass tracks in it just aren't the cleanest. It's not like listening to electronic music now where it's like this clean perfect bass response. It's a pretty, you know, basic or there's a lack of dimension to it and cleanliness, and for any IEMs that are not tuned extremely well to handle all kinds of different bass, a lot of times you just get this kind of basic kind of sound with it, and it almost sounds like flabby, like it doesn't really hit the way that you'd want. But then there'll be some songs, like if you listen to a more recent song like something by The Weeknd that has just got this perfect electronic, I'm sure perfectly tuned bass, it sounds great with it. But just be aware that the bass, although it's powerful on these, does not sound the cleanest, and it does not have as much range as I would really like to hear in an IEM. The treble does feel very detailed immediately, so when you start listening to these, you'll get a sense of detail and crispiness and that kind of thing that does stick around while you listen to music for a while, but eventually you realize that the treble, as much as it feels detailed and crisp, it's also fatiguing and like a little bit overdone, where upper mid range and above that, like hi-hats and tinkly sounds, are harsh and fatiguing. So it doesn't always do a very good. It's, you know, like a lot of other KZ options. It's tuned with a lot of bass and a lot of treble, and not a lot of nuance to it. When I listen to "The Game Has Changed" on the Tron soundtrack, that's a song that I think a lot of IEM struggle with, because the bass isn't tuned to be. It's like they used whatever sound they wanted. They didn't just use the sound that was going to sound the cleanest on an IEM. So when you listen to it, a lot of times an IEM that does not have great bass response, it just, I mean, you can feel the bass, but it just doesn't resolve very well. And that was the case on these. But it does do a great job of female vocals, sounded very clean and clear when I listened to Whitney Houston's voice on "I Will Always Love You." And very clean, very sharp, you know. But again, I think it's because if you get a certain instrument or a certain mix of instruments, it'll sound good. If you do not, then it will not. So just be aware that it may be hit or miss depending on the kind of music that you are listening to. On the track "Ripple" from the Grateful Dead, it's a very warm acoustic sound. Jerry's got a very warm voice as well. So I think this matched this because it actually gives you more of a feeling of like cleanliness and cleanliness, which sounds very good. But there's a lot of music that this does not sound great with, because that additional cleanliness and harshness on a lot of songs actually doesn't sound great. Like on Pearl Jam's "Black," hi-hats and upper mid-range vocals sounded really harsh, but when you didn't hear that, Eddie's voice sounded extremely clean. But then he hits the high notes and it starts to hurt your ears. So just know it's kind of a mixed bag. Listening to the same music with the 7Hz Zeros, I immediately felt better listening to them. They have a much cleaner, more balanced sound and aren't nearly as fatiguing. You keep the good energy, but it tones down the fatiguing parts. So, I mean, you can just tell, I mean, as much as, you know, I think Critical's a mixed bag in terms of his tuning, but especially on these, you can tell the artistry that was put into it, where those little parts that KZ tends to struggle with, he's able to tune them in a way where they avoid some of those pitfalls. It has a better, cleaner bass response that resolves better. It's not quite as strong, but you get that clean hit that's almost regardless of the music that you're listening to. And it just feels like a better, more put together sound profile. It doesn't have these weak points where it hurts your ears or makes the bass sound really bad. It just kind of does its job on every track that you would want to listen to. It feels like this is the sound profile that KZ was going for with the ZVX and just didn't quite get there because they lean towards the stuff that they usually do, which is kind of overdoing the treble and overdoing the bass. Okay, so that's my initial impressions. Let's get into the frequency responses and the audio samples. I'm still learning about capturing frequency response graphs, so if there's anything I can improve on, please let me know. I captured these using REW on PC and averaged the left and right performance while narrowing the graph to 20 Hz by 20,000 Hz and an SPL of 85 to 30. I matched everything at 85 dB at 1000 Hz so I could normalize the levels between the different captures. For those not familiar with frequency response graphs, you read them left to right. According to Sound Guys, 20 to 300 Hz accounts for bass, 300 to 4000 Hz for mids, and anything above 4000 is treble. Higher here means there is more, lower means there is less. Bassy parts of music will be in the low end, guitars and vocals are in the mid-range, and tinkly instruments like hi-hats on drums will be in the treble area. The chart shows the 7Hz Zero with the least amount of bass, followed by the CCA CRA, then the KZ ZVX. The chart for the CCA CRA and the ZVX are surprisingly similar once you get to about 40 Hz, until you get to about 2000 Hz. At that point, the new CCA CRA gets a significant boost going into the 4K range, then starts dropping back down. In my listening, I liked the balance of the CCA CRA better and found the ZVX fatiguing. Maybe it's the slightly higher 10K area, but regardless, this is why I always think it's more important to listen than to just look at frequency response graphs. The 7Hz Zero stays more balanced on both sides of the spectrum, and I feel like this is reflected in the listening experience of the IEM. Okay, let's listen to some sound samples. I recorded the same music using the KZ and each of these units to an IEM measurement microphone. This won't be a perfect comparison to how they sound in real life. You have your own listening device with its own tuning that will further change the sound, but this should help you get a feeling for each of them and the difference in the sound between them. So what did you think? I normalized the audio levels, but just so you know, the 700 is a little less sensitive and recorded at a lower volume. To me, it sounds like a smoother response without as much boominess in the bass and without as much sharpness in the higher frequencies. Okay, let's talk about gaming performance. The CCA CRA, the ZVX, and the 700 are all very good for gaming. The CCA CRA and ZVX both give good directionality and detail. The 700 are overall my favorite. They give a good balance of directionality and detail, while giving a good sense of space. The bass isn't always as pronounced, but because of that, constant gunfire doesn't get as fatiguing. I believe because all of these are tuned for more treble energy than a warm set like the KZ HBB has, you can't go wrong for gaming with any of these. They're all a very good choice. My takeaway from the ZVX is that they are a pretty typical KZ creation, although one with a really good build quality and looks. They do a good job of gaming, but are a little heavy-handed listening to hip-hop music because of the muddy bass response. They're also too harsh for me for more treble-leaning music. Metal would be very fatiguing on these. For warmer music, though, or female vocals, they do a pretty good job. I just think there are better options out there. Anyway, they're not a bad set. They just aren't the best. So anyway, that's what I got. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate all of you tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope you have a great day.